Hey everyone, Georgie here with Ukraine Matters. Ukrainian offensive continues, their tactical successes here and there, but more importantly is that Ukrainian strategy is working, and we're going to cover this and more in today's video. Firstly, let me kind of quickly remind you about this bridgehead on the Antonovsky Bridge area. We've seen some fresh videos of Russians trying to storm into that area and failing again from Ukrainian offensive. But more importantly, the footage showed that it was happening about in the same area where Ukraine already kind of had the bridgehead. So it doesn't seem that they're expanding it significantly. So far, they're being a nuisance for Russians, but no major developments are done yet, despite some Ukrainian troops coming out with statements that they are preparing for the offensive in the Kherson region, a Kherson region being this part of Russian occupied territory. So far words, but not many actions to report. If we're talking actions to report, let's talk about Pyatikhatki. Last time when I was talking to you, I said on a tactical level, Ukrainians are having troubles with Russians fortifying these positions on the hills. I should use red for Russians. So Russians additionally fortifying these positions on the hills and Ukrainians struggling to break their positions going uphill. So what Ukrainians did instead, they shifted their focus of attack, and now they're attacking from the direction of Kamyanske, and they are able to attack also direction which is to the west of the Lobkve village. This whole area is like the hill is about like this. Oh, sorry. This whole area is a hill that goes about like this. So Ukrainians are trying to get on top of this hill from essentially the north and the east, and therefore kind of, how do you say, take the detour route to break the siege of Zherebyanki and then advance on top of the hill and proceed forward. So we'll see if it's gonna happen, if it's gonna go well. We're gonna continue with that. The Battle of Robotine also rages on. We continue seeing multiple reports. Some say Ukrainians are in the northern part of Robotine, but generally speaking, this whole area, I'm putting it now in a gray zone because I'm hearing like one day Ukrainians have advanced, then the next day Russians have kicked Ukrainians out, then Ukrainians have advanced again, and so on. It's a hard battle area. It's a very much a gray zone for now. I know supposedly some tactical successes from Ukrainians, but because there has been so many reports about things happening here, I'm going to wait until we get a confirmed information, even if I'm not going to be the first to repeat it. Generally speaking, I will cover the generally speaking later on, but the situation is nice. And we get additional information that around this area, Ukrainians are also trying to do some probing attacks, but nothing specific so far. On the Velika Novosilka front line, the settlement of Priyutne, that was again where Ukrainians entered the settlement and then they had to leave. It is still in Russian control forces. I know the battles are still raging for it, but more importantly, Russians are saying that Staromaiorske, which is like kind of the central to this whole area here. It's if I put central settlements on this area, then it's Staromaiorske and then it's Staromlinivka. So these two are extremely important because they're kind of like the binding tissue of this whole area. Like if the settlements are lost, then certain delivery routes start instantly being cut off. Therefore, taking these central settlements is very helpful, despite the kind of the central interest positions are these on the sides, because this is where the heights are, the hills. But because the roads are here in the valley, therefore losing settlements is a big advantage for any forces in the area because the supplies can come in better. In any case, Russian sources are claiming that Ukrainians are already in control of the Staromaiorske village. With the same as with all settlements in the area, it's fluid. So right now, Ukrainian general staff claims that they are in control of the northern part of the settlement. However, usually when general staff claims something, it's almost like a rock solid proof. So it's like, it's almost like a blue territory. So they don't usually claim something that is not there. So I'm optimistic to this. It definitely seems that Ukrainians have had some advantage in the area, but I'm hesitant right now to talk about it because most importantly, what is being claimed by Ukrainians is that, well, firstly, a lot of them are tired now. Let's put it very honestly, because it's been the same four brigades that are fighting for over 1.5 months, and if they want it or don't want it, but certain combat power has been depleted, right? So they need to reconstitute themselves and so on. So right now it's more of a foot fighting, like a smaller scale fighting, except maybe around the area of Staromaiorske. This is where we saw some major mechanized offensives. But other than that, it's mostly Ukrainians trying to advance to then Russians reveal the positions of their artillery, essentially draw a fire on themselves, and then Ukrainians destroy those artillery. First month and a half has passed, results are incredible, and this is what I can say about the southern offensive. Right now, that's Ukraine is not engaging their additional troops, so they don't have a fresh forces for kind of the new wave of fresh advance, but I don't think that's the point. The point right now, what Ukraine is doing is they're destroying Russian artillery, they're destroying Russian key assets. And the same Russians that were laughing in the face of everyone that supports Ukraine, like trolling everyone, writing comments and everything, saying, ha ha ha, look, the offensive failed, all your Bradleys are gone. After a month of Ukrainian offensive, the failed offensive supposedly, they are now starting to suspect something. Like Russian Telegram channels and Russian news sources and everything, they're like saying, it's kind of bad. It's kind of bad because the reason they were able to stop a lot of the Ukrainian advances, the reason why Ukraine didn't advance is because they were dipping into the reserves like there is no tomorrow. More and more we're getting reports saying that in certain areas there is no reserves anymore. That certain areas have completely depleted the reserve pool and they've been sent to the front line. Now, it's not completely yet, but it's definitely already more than half. I would say maybe closer to 3/4 of the reserves that Russia had have been already engaged to the front lines. It's a major development. It's a very bad idea for Russians to do so. And a lot of the more serious Russian analysts, they finally kind of they woke up from the hangover, they cleared their head, then they looked around and they looked at the apartment and it's a mess. And that's what's happening right now. Russians are looking at their situation on the map and they say, okay, wow, yeah, it does seem we cleaned up. It does seem we stopped Ukrainians. Stopped. But, our assets are being destroyed. Artillery support is not always available. Units on the front lines are having it tough. Ukrainians are not stopping and reserves are running low. And this is overlaying closely with the Russian morale situation that they're doing the purge, but we're going to cover it in the second part of the video. So overall, Ukrainian tactic works. Whatever Ukraine is planning, it is slow, it's grinding, it's not as satisfying as probably many of us hoped for, but as more I read, we kind of agree that this is the plan. And the good news is that the plan is working. Russians are literally yelling to our face that please stop, we're dying out here. Additionally, the situation around Klishivka and Bakhmut and Berkhivka and so on. So this is the important, because some people misunderstand it. Some people think that this is also part of the offensive, which it is not. It is just the troops that were there before defending Bakhmut. They got additional reinforcements, yes, but it wasn't like a reinforcement that was prepared for the Ukrainian offensive operation, the 3rd Assault Brigade, for example. So right now, what is happening around Bakhmut and the gains that Ukraine is getting is just the same forces that were defending Bakhmut previously, now just attacking Russian forces. So no specific new forces were dedicated to the area. This is important to know for us. And Ukrainians are having pretty good success. Firstly, as I already explained to you, Ukrainians are in a big advantage right now because they completely secured the hills, the fortification, which is to the west of Klishivka on the hill. Now, Russians are still trying to do attacks, so it's not like it's a completely secured position that is in the rear, but it's still now a favorable position that Ukrainians are holding, and Russians don't have the forces to storm it, I believe, so they will be able only to distract it, and the results are already paying off. For example, because of the position that they're securing at the north, they were able to undercut the Russians that were located in this area. And now Russians are in a little bit of problematic situation because their whole kind of line is now falling apart. Because Klishivka, remember, it's a village here, but it's not relevant. What's relevant here is the front line, is the high ground, and more importantly, if Kurdyumivka is taken, or at least Kurdyumivka is being flanked, that's going to be a big problem for Russians. This advance is important because this is kind of the start of the hill. Like if you look at the topographic map, then there is a hill here, and then this hill, Kurdyumivka, Andriivka, and so on, this is additional here over here, and it was also kind of coming to this side. So Ukrainians are getting foothold on the hill that is protecting, that is Andriivka and Kurdyumivka protecting on. So as Ukrainians will advance deeper, it's going to be very problematic because from this hill, this area around Opitne and everything else becomes very much untenable. Or untenable. I'm sorry. Again, I'm butchering the word. Write how I should spell my words again, please. Yes, so overall, Ukrainians in the south are having good success. Ukrainians in the north are having a little bit less good. Right now, to kind of, again, put you where the targets are, because we're looking at the place names, and I want to start slowly introduce you what are the kind of the key points for Ukrainians to capture. And key points in this area are actually this height, and this height right here. So all of these three, and we know that Ukrainians are already advancing towards Yahidne height and so on, but all of these heights, they are key to Ukrainian success. Right now, they are in control of Russians, and Ukrainians wants to kind of push towards them, but they're having a strong resistance here. And it's important for me to take a second and say that because this is like nothing that has been reinforced by any additional forces from Ukrainian side, that it's the same units, the fact that they are attracting quite a lot of Russians' attention to this area is again showing that Bakhmut is doing its job. What we need to know around Bakhmut is that right now, land taking by Ukraine is a nice cherry on the top. It's a nice bonus to have. The most important role of Bakhmut right now is to get Russian troops from any other parts of the front line to take their time to go to Bakhmut. And Ukrainians are doing it excellently. They are drawing attention, they're drawing resource from the other parts of the front line into Bakhmut area. So I want you to be very aware of that even if there is nothing happening in Bakhmut, in a sense of like land take by Ukrainians, it's not a bad thing because Ukrainians are still doing what they are supposed to do. And additionally, if we're talking about this part here, I would talk to you about Rozdolivka area where Ukrainians were able to push Russians out a little bit. And this is because Ukrainians wants to get there. There's like a start of the hill where Ukrainians have taken. And this hill kind of starts and it overlooks Soledar. If this hill is taken by Ukrainians, this pretty much opens this whole southern area for Ukrainians to be overlooked by the artillery, and it just paints a very bleak picture for Russians in Blagodatne, Soledar, and everything else. It's a very favorable position if Ukraine will be able to get there. I'll remind you that when Soledar fell, this is how Russians were able to do it. Russians were able to break through Ukrainian defenses, take this hill north of Soledar, and then make life of Ukrainians a little bit problematic, especially because they also attacked from the south side as well. And then Soledar was kind of overlooked from two sides, and it was in a valley, and it wasn't a good time for Ukrainians. And Ukrainians now are trying to push back. I want to answer the question whether or not the purges that are happening right now in the Russian military is something worth paying attention to. And my usual answer was no, because I don't believe like Russians would be able to do coup, like despite I know Prigozhin tried, but he was failed because just like, but it's, I kind of thought about it. So instead, I would want to answer it this way. It's a very nice destabilizing factor because the failed Prigozhin's coup has proved to Putin that whatever kind of additional people that he would like to introduce to his court, because remember, it's some kind of a feudal system. So all of these people that are unknown to him, that are not close to him, they are a danger. They are a danger to his system and his rule. So instead, he pivoted to essentially keep, even if he knows that, for example, Gerasimov, that Shoigu are completely useless, that they cannot fight the war like this, that they don't have the capacity to do so, even so, that they are loyal to him. So he doubled down on the system of loyalty. And I believe like a year ago or so, someone asked me like, well, if Russia would be more competent, they would be able to capture Ukraine. And at that moment, I answered the question, if Russia and Russian generals would be more competent, they would not invade Ukraine. And this is where we come essentially to the same conclusion. Right now, competent generals that are seeing how the situation is developing on the front lines, seeing how the situation is developing with the forces on the line of contact with Ukrainians and the coming Ukrainian offensive, they are seeing the troubles ahead. So they're raising alarms. However, because of that, because Putin wants to see loyalty rather than any kind of competence, he says that whenever there is a critique, he's like directly connecting it is like, okay, if there's someone critiquing me, that means he's potentially disloyal. Therefore, he needs to be sacked. And that's what's happening right now in the Russian military. The problem with this is that this purge is automatically targeted at competence versus loyalty. This is where the pressure that Ukrainian armed forces have been executing on Russian forces is starting to work. That the problems that needs to be solved in Russian military, and they're trying to be solved by the competent people, and anytime these competent people start to raise the issues of problems in the army, then loyalty factor starts playing into that and saying, oh, you're being disloyal, we need to sack you. That is the problem of the Putin system. And Putin's system, basically what we're seeing is its system imploding. They're cutting out good people, well, good for their forces and so on. People that, for example, right now the big question is Teplinsky. He's the general of the VDV, one of the forces, like Russian elite forces that have shown that they can really fight. Relatively, obviously. And VDV said that if only you try to capture, like to put Teplinsky in the prison or anything else, we will take off our positions and we will go and defend him. We will go back. So at first, my answer was that, no, I don't feel that the purge that the Russians are doing is going to influence Russians doing their warfare in Ukraine. However, now I see that the fact that they're cutting out competence is going to, at least short to medium term, is going to create a deficit of a good command in Russian forces, because loyalty is going to be before all. So it's basically like a system that propagates lying. The more you lie, the better you do. And it's in a short to medium term, it's going to be beneficial to Ukrainians, both because competent leaders were removed and because all of the other leaders will be essentially motivated to lie. Big thanks to all of the supporters of this channel. Big thanks to all of the people that continue being members, that go on Buy Me a Coffee, buys me a coffee, subscribes as YouTube members. I love you guys. Thank you so much for supporting me. Thank you so much for supporting Armed Forces of Ukraine. Thank you to moderators. I love you all, guys. Slava Ukraini, and I'll see you next time.